Hey everybody, this is Gesler again. This time I'll be doing a post by Raf Gray. Um, the very first post in the thread, Humanity is Overrated. Like any of my posts, I will be just reading it off head and kind of going with it. This has a lot of dialogue, so we'll see if my voice sounds good with that. And there are a couple words here that I skimmed through this. There's a couple words here that are kind of hard to pronounce, but we'll see what I say when I get to them. Alright, here goes nothing. After the wrestling match at the Grub Inn, the half-giant headed back to his quarters at the Czechstoffel headquarters. He rested a bit to regain some energy, and then ventured down to the training hall. Training, as never-ending as it may have seemed, was a necessity in Raf's life. It kept him alive, and allowed him to have one more step in front of every Skrivnovska. Raf stopped at the door and read Gal Man Blazon, otherwise interpreted as Crazy Man. Being slightly groggy, Raf must have thought it meant something else and entered the room without hesitation. Standing in the middle of the room, talking to himself, was a gnome of 2 feet. He looked as if he had a bolt of lightning hit him several times. His green hair was frizzy and sticking out at every angle. His nose covered with the majority of his face, and his eyes were almost as large as fists. As Raf entered the room, the gnome stopped and looked at him. "Ah, you are here. Please sit, sit," the gnome demanded as he twitched, pointing at the lonely chair in the center of the room. It was as if the gnome had been expecting Raf. Against better judgment, Raf sat down in the chair and was about to speak when the gnome began to talk, and talk, and talk. "My name is Professor Kruger. Today you'll be learning about human psychology on a social level," Professor Kruger said as he turned his back to the Geeka and began to write on his own chalkboard. The gnome had no care to really know Raf. The half-giant did enter the room and interpret the gnome during whatever mess a gnome does. "Today, you will be learning a new skill. This is going to be a training session that he passed a look at the Geeka, "I'm sure that you've never been exposed to, and I expect you to pay close attention to what I say and participate, as this is going to be a vital skill for you to use." The professor walked over to the far end of the room and slid a blackboard in front of the half-giant. "I am going to teach you the basics of human psychology used for all races, not just humans, on a social level. Psychology is the study of behavior of individuals and groups. Psychology on a social level, otherwise known as a social psychology, is the study of how people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by the presence of others." Raf nodded along as the professor spoke to show respect and acknowledge that he understood what was being explained. The professor turned to the blackboard and wrote in white chalk, "Self-concept, or self-identity, is how others refer to the whole sum of beliefs that people have about themselves. It refers to an individual's perception of self in relation to any number of characteristics." "I assume you can read?" the professor asked mockingly. "Yes, I can read," Raf said, keeping himself in check. "Good. Do you understand what I wrote?" the professor asked. "Yes. Self-identity is how one identifies themselves as it pertains to their characteristic such as looks, race, height, weight, etc.," Raf stated as he leaned back in his chair. "Brilliant! You are not stupid like most figures of your caliber." The professor meant to be offensive, but only to prove his point. Teaching a non-combative, non-active skill was always a challenge to newcomers like the Geeka, and the professor was happy this student had common sense. Let us move on. The professor wiped the board again to write again. Social influence refers to the way people affect the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of others. You can influence others on a social level, meaning changing their attitude, thoughts, actions, reactions by influencing and persuading them as an individual and or group. Again, the professor turned to the board and continued to write. The following three variables have been found to influence all races on a social physiological level. 1. The communicator, including credibility, expertise, trustworthiness, and attractiveness. 2. The message, including varied degrees of reason, emotion, such as fear and hostility, one-sided or two-sided arguments, and other types of informational content. 3. The audience, including a variety of demographics and personal traits. I can tell your character consists of natural charisma. You are also young, healthy, and attractive. These are all variables that will help you as the communicator. Raph smiled, crossed his arms, and sat just a little bit higher in his seat with pride. Now, don't you get so full of yourself. I said attractive, but not godlike. The professor shook his head at Raph. With all truth, the professor set himself up for Raph's reaction and had no reason to be upset. After all, with every action is an equal and greater reaction. Now, the message can be anything from violence to a simple debate. The professor finished and looked at Raph, waiting for him to add on what he had said. Yes. A message is what I want the individual or group to hear. Or change to. Raph asked quizzically. You are partially correct. The message is what you translate to the individual or group. If you threaten with hostility, you are sending a message of violence and fear. Your message will direct your group or individual to act in a way that you are persuading them. What is non-violent way to persuade and carry across your message? Raph leaned forward and glared at the board. He started to mouth the words without making a sound. The message, including varying degrees of reason, emotion, such as fear and hostility, one-sided or two-sided arguments, and other types of informational content. By manipulating the conversation, a play of words as to confuse the group or individuals into agreeing to something that originally refused to. Raph said as he leaned back on his chair. This training class was rather different than what is normal training, but it was interesting and Raph thirsted for more. Yes, to manipulate the conversation is correct. We do this by understanding their self-concept and self-identity. We examine how they move, how they talk, how they react to others around them. We test our subjects to guarantee our understanding of their self-identity. Lastly, your audience. This is simple and you should understand this. Your audience is the individual or group you're trying to influence. This may be a variety of characteristics that you're trying to change in a person. The professor began to stroke his chin as he looked at Raph. Do you understand this? I do not want to overwhelm you, and we will not move on unless you fully understand what is being brought to your plate. Professor Kruger crossed his arms and waited. Yes, I understand what you are teaching me. This is very detailed, yet I believe I understand, Raph said as he adjusted his position in his seat. Good! We have just a little more to go over, then we will practice what we have learned. The professor rubbed his hands together and smiled. That part of the teaching was always his favorite. Most students failed at the task the first time and made fools of themselves. It seemed that his students would talk and approach others as if they were primitive devices incapable of thinking. It was a beginner mistake always, and they soon understood that they would have a natural in their approach. The professor turned to the chalkboard and erased what was up there only to add the following. Norms, the implicit rules and expectations for group members and individuals to follow, e.g., saying "Ça va na do," grasping arms in a welcome. Roles, implicit rules and expectations for specific members within a group, e.g., the oldest sibling, who may have additional responsibilities in the family. Relations, patterns of liking within the group, and also differences in prestige or status, e.g., leaders. After the professor finished, he pointed to the top line for Gika to read out loud. Raph leaned out of his seat. Of course. Norms, implicit rules and expectations for group members, individuals to follow, e.g., saying "Ça va na do," grasping arms in a welcome. Provide me with an example other than what is written on the board. With that, the professor pointed to the next line. A norm. A norm would be not to stare at someone for a long period of time. Another example would be to walk through the streets instead of running. The professor nodded his head in agreement, waiting for Raph to continue to the next line. Roles. Implicit rules and expectations for specific members within the group, e.g., the oldest sibling, who may have additional responsibilities in the family. What is your role, Master Raph Gray? The professor asked as he awaited a valid answer. My role? Well, I am a white terror. I am to eliminate any Skrivoska I come in contact with. In fact, I actively search for these types. Raph finished and paused to see if the professor was going to add anything, but he didn't. Raph continued on. Relations, patterns of liking within the group, and also differences in prestige or status, e.g., leaders. My relation, the rank of Nashka, as the Chekskaful. Excellent! Now, if you have to change the norm of any given situation, we will receive some sort of reaction. However, when you change the norm, you must change the norm to react with the way that you are seeking. Remember, norms are set that everyone conforms to the same action or reaction. So, if I am meeting you for the first time and want to show you disrespect, I will avoid greeting you with clasping arms. This may be also come across as having distrust. A hatred or distrust of a certain race, such as an orc or a troll, is to conform to the norm as well as to the stereotype. As the professor finished, he chuckled and muttered, Stereotype. A stereotype is a popular belief about specific social groups or types of individuals. So that would be the same as other races thinking the geek are dumb, slow creatures. Raph asked in a rhetorical manner. Let us finish your teachings by learning to observe others' self-concept and experiment using what you have learned to get the results you strive for. With that, the professor draped his white cloak and motioned to exit the building, never addressing the last comment Raph made. I hope that came out good. I just hope it doesn't sound horrendous on the microphone, but who knows?